The lie wasn't about the restaurant, Jack said, turning to Lisa. The lie was about safety. But the restaurant? That's the most honest thing I've ever done. Every plate is a confession. Every meal is an invitation. The board deliberated for only 5 minutes. Lisa Page was dismissed, her design firm deemed a conflict of interest. Larry Dallas was escorted out after he tried to sell the board members exclusive pictures of their own shoes. As they walked out into the Santa Monica sun, Jack and Janet were met by Mr. Furley. "Jack," Furley said, looking confused, "that letter, it said you weren't. But I thought, Gladys and I." "Mr. Furley," Jack said, putting a hand on his shoulder, "I'm a man of many mysteries, but the biggest mystery is how I ever got lucky enough to live in your building." Furley beamed, adjusting his ascot. "Well, that's true. It takes a certain kind of guy to handle the threads." Chapter 18. The Heritage of 201. 20 years later, the Santa Monica skyline had changed, but apartment 201 remained a pocket of preserved memories. The wooden balcony had been reinforced, and the wicker coffee table had long since been replaced by a heavy oak one. But the soul of the place was intact. Jack and Janet were no longer the frantic youngsters scrambling to hide roommates in the bathroom. They were the established couple of the boardwalk, Jack, the silver-haired grandfather of fusion cuisine, and Janet, whose floral empire now spanned 3 cities. One autumn afternoon, a sharp, rhythmic knock echoed through the door. "Jack, can you get that?" Janet called from the study, where she was finalizing the arrangements for their 25th anniversary gala. Jack, currently graying but still possessing that same mischievous twinkle in his eyes, opened the door. Standing there was a young woman with a familiar mop of blonde hair and a suitcase that looked like it had seen better days. "Hi," the girl said, her voice a perfect echo of Cindy's youthful enthusiasm. "I'm looking for apartment 201, my mom said. Well, she said this was the place where everything started. Sophie." Jack breathed, recognizing Cindy's daughter. "Uncle Jack!" Sophie cried, dropping her bags and throwing her arms around him. "Mom said if I was going to move to the big city, I should start where the architecture was solid. She said you might have a room?" Jack looked back at Janet, who had appeared in the hallway, her face lighting up with joy. He then looked at the extra bedroom, the one that had once been Cindy's, then a study, and was now essentially a guest suite. "Well," Jack said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "there is a catch, Sophie. We have a very strict set of rules in this house." "Rules?" Sophie asked, looking a bit nervous. "First," Janet said, stepping forward and hugging her, "no pen pals from up north. And second, if you ever run into a man in a lime green leisure suit, though they're mostly in museums, now you feed his turtle. No questions asked." Sophie laughed, the sound filling the apartment with a vibrant, new energy. As she began to unpack, Jack and Janet stood on the balcony, watching the Pacific. "Here we go again," Janet whispered, leaning her head on Jack's shoulder. "Not quite," Jack said. "This time, the truth is already moved in. We're just adding a new wing." Chapter 19. The Masterclass. The anniversary gala for Tripper's Table was the event of the decade. The boardwalk was closed off, and a massive tent had been erected, filled with the scent of lilies and slow-roasted duck. Sophie was serving as the lead hostess, her natural charm making her an instant favorite with the guests. But the night held one final test for the Tripper legacy. A young food critic, known for his acerbic wit and his penchant for deconstructing established icons, had been seated at the head table. His name was Victor Dallas, Larry's son, though he had spent the last decade trying to distance himself from his father's flamboyant failures. "Mr. Tripper," Victor said, as Jack approached the table, "I've read your book, The Art of the Confession. You claim that honesty is the foundation of flavor, but isn't it true that your entire career started with a masquerade?" The table went silent. Janet tightened her grip on her wine glass. Larry Dallas, sitting a few seats away, looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Jack didn't flinch. He sat down opposite Victor and poured himself a glass of water. "It started with a need for a roof over our heads, Victor," Jack said, "and it continued because we found something worth protecting. But you're right, there was a masquerade. And for a long time, I thought that was the weak point in the structure. He looked around the room at Furley and Gladys, now 90 and still dancing, at Cindy and Mike, and at Janet. But then I realized, Jack continued, that the masquerade was just the scaffolding. You need scaffolding to build something high. You need it to hold the weight while the foundation sets. But eventually, the scaffolding comes down. What's left is the building. And Victor, if you want to judge the building, don't look at the wood we used to hold it up 25 years ago. Taste the food. Jack signaled to the kitchen. A plate of simple, perfectly seared scallops was placed before Victor. No fireworks, Jack said. No atmosphere machines. Just the truth. Victor took a bite. He closed his eyes. The room held its breath. It's balanced, Victor whispered, his sharp edges finally softening. It's honest. He looked at his father, Larry, who was beaming with pride. For the first time, the Dallas legacy and the Tripper legacy found a common ground, not in a lie, but in the simple, undeniable reality of a well-cooked meal. Chapter 20. The Vow Revisited. The final guests had departed, leaving the boardwalk to the quiet company of the moon and the tide. Jack and Janet walked back to apartment 201, their hands entwined, their steps synchronized by decades of shared rhythm. They didn't turn on the lights. They didn't need to. They knew every inch of their home by heart. They sat on the sofa, the same spot where Jack had once tried to see how Lisa Page looked on the sofa and watched the waves. 25 years, Janet said, her voice filled with a quiet wonder. And we're still standing, Jack added. No weak floorboards, no sinking building. Jack? Janet turned to him, her face illuminated by the silver moonlight. Do you ever miss it? The scramble, the frantic hiding, the pen pals? Jack thought for a moment. He thought of the laughter that had been fueled by fear, and the intimacy that had been forged in the fire of shared deception. I miss the energy of it, he admitted. But I wouldn't trade the peace we have now for all the soufflés in the world. Being honest with the world was the hardest thing I ever did, Janet. But being honest with you? That was the easiest. He leaned in, and the kiss was no longer a promise of a renovation. It was the celebration of a finished masterpiece. As the Santa Monica sun began to rise on a new decade, the architecture of a lie was finally, irrevocably gone. In its place stood a heritage of truth, a home built on the only foundation that never cracks a love that learned to knock on the door, stay for the kisses, and eventually build a world that was exactly, perfectly, honestly, its own. Chapter 21. The Beaumont Journal. The morning after the anniversary gala was draped in a soft, coastal fog. Sophie was already up, helping Jack inventory the restaurant's cellar. As they moved through the cool, dimly lit room, Jack's foot caught on a loose floorboard near the rear rack, a spot he'd walked over 1,000 times but had never noticed before. Watch it, Uncle Jack, Sophie cautioned. That's strange, Jack muttered. He knelt, prying the board loose. It was Professor Beaumont's personal journal, one that had been missing since the day he passed. As Jack flipped through the pages, his eyes widened. It wasn't just recipes. It was a chronicle of every chef Beaumont had ever mentored and a detailed account of the trial of the trio. He knew everything, Sophie, Jack whispered, his voice trembling. He even knew about the night the building sank. He wrote about how he stood outside in the shadows, watching us scramble with the pen pals. He wasn't testing my cooking. He was testing our loyalty to each other. But as Jack reached the final pages, the tone of the journal shifted. Beaumont had written about a secret partner, a silent investor who had helped fund the boardwalk's development, a person who had stayed in the shadows for 40 years and now, according to a recent entry from the ATS, wanted their due. Who is it? Sophie asked, leaning in. The name was blurred by water damage, but the initials were clear. E.P. Chapter 22. Shadows of Santa Monica. The mystery of E.P. didn't stay a mystery for long. Within the week, a fleet of black SUVs appeared on the boardwalk. A group of men in sharp, tech mogul attire began measuring the distances between the shops. Leading them was a woman whose presence felt like a cold front moving in from the north. "My name is Eleanor Prynne," she announced, stepping into Tripper's table. She was Arthur Prynne's daughter, but where her father had been a man of quiet observation, Eleanor was a woman of aggressive expansion. "My father was the silent hand that kept this boardwalk from being sold to developers decades ago. But times have changed. The architecture of this district is obsolete. We're building the Glass Horizon, a multi-story luxury mall. Your restaurant is in the path of the future." "You can't buy the boardwalk, Eleanor," Janet said, her voice rising in the empty restaurant. "It's a protected heritage site." "It was," Eleanor corrected, laying a set of legal documents on the bar. "But my father's original contracts had a sunset clause, one that expires on the anniversary of his death, which is next Tuesday." The threat was real. Eleanor Prynne wasn't just looking for a buyout, she was looking to erase the past. She viewed the Tripper legacy as a relic of a dishonest age. "Your father believed in us," Jack said. "He saw the truth behind the scaffolding." "My father was a romantic," Eleanor sneered. "I'm a realist. And the reality is, your lease is now in my hands. I'll deconstruct this place until there isn't a single brick left of your truth." Chapter 23. The Secret Ingredient. The battle for the boardwalk became a Santa Monica legend. Jack, Janet, and Sophie refused to back down. They rallied the old neighborhood, Larry, Dallas, Cindy, even the grandchildren of the regulars who had once frequented the Regal Beagle. But legal battles are won with documents, not memories. Jack pored over the Beaumont Journal every night, looking for the secret ingredient that could stop the demolition. "Sophie, look at this," Jack said at 3 a.m. on the eve of the deadline. He pointed to a faint sketch in the back of the book, a blueprint of the original building foundations. Beaumont and Prynne didn't just build shops, they built a sanctuary. "Look at the shared wall between apartment 201 and the restaurant." Sophie looked closer. "It's not just a wall, Uncle Jack. It's an arch, a structural arch that spans the entire block. If you remove the restaurant, the entire residential building above it, the one that's actually a designated landmark, will collapse." And Arthur Prynne knew that, Janet realized, joining them. He made sure that the legacy of the people was literally woven into the stones of the building. To tear down the restaurant is to destroy a landmarked residence. Eleanor Prynne had overlooked the physical architecture in her pursuit of the financial one.